Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster. I'm the host of the program. And as always, I have nothing but exciting programs, and today is no different. We who live in the town of Stoughton always question what is going on in our town government. What are our Board of Selectmen doing? What decisions are being made? How are our lives being affected on a daily basis by decisions that are made at Town Hall? Well, I'm not going to be the one who answers that, but my guest today will definitely be able to do so, and he is both a friend and is the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and my guest today is the chairman, Bob O'Regan. Bob, good morning.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad that you're here. As I go about the town and you go into the restaurants and you're at the shopping mall, people are always asking about what's going on in the town of Stoughton, and to set the record straight, I figured I'd go right to the top and have you in here as a guest of ours. So it might be helpful because I always like to educate the viewing audience. And there are those of us who pay close attention to the town politics, but there are others who may not be as informed. Can you talk about the whole function of the Board of Selectmen, how you develop your agendas, how you make your decisions, things of that nature? So I'm going to give you the total floor in order to talk about the process of what is the Board of Selectmen and how do you handle your business, particularly under your tenure?
Well, let me start with what the job description and where the job description is. So the job description for the Board of Selectmen is in the town charter. And it breaks the role and the authority of the Board of Selectmen into a bunch of little topics. But the big phrase would be the Board of Selectmen is the chief executive officer of the town. Not individual selectmen running around. 5 people functioning as a board, as a unit. And what chief executive officer means is different from chief administrative officer. So the Board of Selectmen is a policy board in this town. It's a policy board in most towns. In some town charters, selectmen have more day-to-day responsibility for town government than ours does. Ours pretty much, we have no day-to-day responsibility for the functioning of town government other than to be responsible that it's run well and appropriately. All of those day-to-day duties are the town manager as the chief administrative officer of the town. And so as policy board, the Board of Selectmen is responsible for directing town staff through the town manager in addressing priorities for the citizens of the town, for supervising how they're done. Some specific roles of the Board of Selectmen are to submit a proposed town budget to town meeting. A big responsibility that we're working hard to pay attention to is to set the agenda for town meeting. So there's some other, less global things, but if folks are familiar with what a board of directors does in a business, it would probably be akin to a board of directors in a business. And a way to look at the kind of responsibility we have is if you take into account all the tax revenue, all the other resources we get, we're looking at a business with revenue that we're responsible for overseeing, separate from the school day-to-day. But the overall town budget with expenses is in the range of $125 million a year.
It's no small feat.
Well, yes. So collective bargaining with municipal unions is our responsibility. Appointments to boards and committees is our responsibility.
You're the street commissioners, too.
We're the street commissioners. Generally how state law is set up is in a town, unless there's another dedicated board or committee.
You got it.
It's the Board of Selectmen. So unless we had a licensing authority, we do all the licensing, all the permits. That's basically it. And I think it's how we're trying to approach that collectively that might be a little different So what we've done in the past, since the board changed in December, is really try to make a survey of the things in town that need to be addressed. So bring in that information, bring in a sense of how to develop priorities. And now we're in the process of weeding them out and setting priorities and setting a timeline to deal with them. You know, if I'll give you the best example people talk about all the time is the downtown. So when we moved to town over 30 years ago, most of the stores were busy. The theater was busy. Downtown had a life to it. Now it doesn't. For the past 20 years, people in town have been really watching the downtown get decimated. So we take it as a responsibility to grab that bull by the horns and figure out how to make it work and get it to work. That didn't happen overnight. It's happened, if you look back through what's happened, it happened really starting in the late 1950s. We haven't taken decisions that we could have taken earlier to prevent what's happened. We've made other decisions, like setting up commercial districts that compete with a central business district. And I don't think, looking back through things, folks at the time they allowed shopping malls in various ends of town realized that would suck business away when they rezoned Washington Street so general business could go anywhere all the time, and sometimes you needed a permit. That would draw all the business right out of the downtown. We've talked about those things, and so we're looking at how we can't put the genie back in the bottle, but we can look ahead and set priorities on how to address these things.
Well, let's talk. I know that you have a number of graphics, and you wanted to, and would this be the appropriate time in order to walk through it?
I think it'll work because it'll give you a sense of what we're working on.
I think it'd just be helpful. You can walk the viewing audience through that, but I do want to come back to, because I think if you don't look at your history, you are destined to repeat it again. And if you've had failures in the past, you're going to repeat those same failures. And you've commented on that, not being critical, but being demonstrative and factual as to what has happened to influence some of the decision making that you have to make now. And even more importantly, I just couldn't let us not sit here and talk about the transition that has taken place on the board since the recall last year. And in terms of, at least by way of observing, the ability of the board under your leadership now being able to move the ball down the court. And you don't need to address that now, but I know you will. But why don't we?
I was always too short to play basketball, so I like the analogy.
Well, in terms of fine. Well, listen, in terms of you can be a point guard. How's that?
Right. Well,
you can be a point guard.
That's about all I got.
Yeah,
too.
well, that's all right. And but I'm sure you can jump to pretty high too.
For the first, so let's talk about priorities.
Yeah.
Okay, so big priorities. The immediate priority is to get a professional town manager in office, and to do it in a way that allows confidence by the citizens of Stoughton that we did the best we could do, recruiting candidates as broadly as we can, so that the selection we pick is as good a job as we can do. That's the general philosophy for this pick. And so the first graphic shows where we are in the timeline, the town manager search.
Can we bring up the graphic, if we will, as that has been prepared by Bob?
Well, we're on town manager search. All right,
Okay.
so you can see we're already past July 10th, and last evening on July 11th, there was a citizens forum at the senior center where people in the community were invited to come in. We've got a consultant working with us. This consultant was a town manager himself for about 20 years. He was city manager in Lowell for, I think, 8. So he's been in the chair, knows what's involved, and he's guiding us in the search and recruitment process. He's got roots, different places to bring in candidates. So we had a citizens forum to get citizen input. We also hope people, if they have ideas and they weren't able to make it to the forum, or they're not prone to go to public sessions and give us information, that they will drop us a note, give us a call, email us. Every selectman gets email addressed to selectman@stoughton-ma.gov. So if people have thoughts, and we've got some already, we'd welcome those. But the search is the consultant is running the search. We wanted to place the technical aspects of the search in an independent body to do it so that the impartiality of the search and the recruitment and the evaluation is there for the town to see. It's an open process, but it's also going to be done impartially so that as the screening and forwarding is done, the public has, as much as we can, has confidence that there's integrity in the hiring process.
Well, let me, I know you talked about the many ways in which one could communicate to the Board of Selectmen on that, but since this is my program, I'm going to do it here in the sense, I disagree with the process. I was subjected to the process in earlier times, and I think that a decision made, and quite frankly, I think the person who's serving as interim town manager personally is doing a fine job with that. And I'm a believer in terms of a person who understands Stoughton. I think the search will get us the persons who nobody else wants, and that will be how the process will be, because there's a cabal that exists in the organization MMA as far as former town managers and former town administrators. But that's my view. I think the process of finding a good person, I think I would respect a decision being made by the five of you as opposed to this so-called transparent process. But that's a feast of belief.
But the Board of Selectmen will make the pick. This screening committee, if you look at, let me explain what the screening committee's function is. We may get 40 to 45 applications. If the Board of Selectmen reviews those 40 to 45 applications, for example, all of the applications will become public record. So if you've got a town manager in another community or an assistant town manager, just like in private employment, who's looking for a job, another job, but doesn't want his current employer to know about it, that ability to attract people is kind of undermined when anybody's application is immediately a public record when it's submitted. Mm-hmm. That's a factor to me because, frankly, I would like, if there is a qualified candidate out there, including internal candidates, and maybe especially internal candidates, to know that until it gets to a point of decision-making, mm-hmm. their application is confidential. Because I think that's the best way we can get people who would want to come without jeopardizing their current position, because frankly it would be asking a lot for somebody to put their current position in jeopardy to apply. So that's a function in that process. And the screening committee is going to evaluate a bunch of applications, winnow it down to, I don't know how many, 7, 5, whatever the number is, and forward those to us, and at which point the applications, once we take them up, would be public record. And it's a way to allow for more meaningful community participation in the selection of the next town manager, because the screening committee is not going to be a bunch of us who are active in government all the time anyway and have no life. The screening committee, we're hoping, will be drawn from various aspects of the community and give us different perspectives on the candidates as part of the screening process. But let's assume we get past this point that you and I have. At some point there will be candidate interviews. Those will be live. Those will be, the public will be able to see them. Our target date to have the appointment done is September 25th. Mm-hmm. It may slip a little bit because we're doing this in August, is when the job will be posted. And from that, we will move forward. It would probably be 2 or 3 weeks, maybe, before the new hire takes office. And then we ramp up and look at what we're doing for the town. Now, the other thing, the next...
Well, I'll just simply say on that, notwithstanding my reservations, I wish you well in the process and in the selection of a good town manager. So at the end of it, we can agree to disagree, but you and I will never be disagreeable, and we may differ, but at the end of the day, we are concurring on the fact that we want to get a good person to be that administrator, chief administrator for the town of Stoughton. So hopefully that's accomplished through the process that you're...
And frankly, we don't know how many and which internal candidates, if any, will apply.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly want to encourage anybody who wishes to apply, and have the public understand that there were no ringers in the process, and that we did the best we could to pick the best candidate we could find. That's the goal.
That's all you can ask for at the end of the day.
If you, let's just say, if you learn from history, we take that goal as a very important goal.
All right. Well, I know with that, I know that's one of the things that you're taking, but I know you have other goals and priorities. So why don't we give you, because otherwise you and I will get.
We could dweeb out on this all
That's
day.
right. Well, listen, we're in the whole time frame we'll be going. So why don't we walk through, because I know you're working on a number of things.
Well, let's talk about, so one of the key aspects for the Board of Selectmen and the time I've been on there is to get the budget process right. So if we zoom out and look at past history, and even times when I've been on the board, the budget cycle, town meeting representatives are sensitive to this, certainly members of FinCom have been sensitive to this, and the taxpayers should be sensitive to this. Is historically, Board of Selectmen gets a town manager's budget. First time we would see a budget is January 2nd. And then there's a scramble through January. One of the problems has been sometimes the nature of what you're dealing with is so great that the selectmen will just, and you saw this, pass on proposed departmental budgets to the Finance Committee and town meeting to sort it out, because either they didn't feel they should, or they weren't able from the 1st of January till the first Tuesday in February when it's due to the Finance Committee. That's a lot of work to do. So we paid attention to that this year because this board was under a big crunch, given we were provided with a 6-line so-called budget that didn't have any detail in it before the end of the year, and the budget we got was $2.8 million out of balance on January 2nd. So we learned deeply from that, and so we've adopted a timeline for the budget, the gist of which I have in a chart, but the gist of which is that we will give the manager...
Can we bring up the chart for a minute?
Yeah, it says annual budget process. So in mid-September, we will have a meeting and we will give the manager directives, and not, what I don't think this is going to be is you'll pay Sally $2 more an hour and you'll pay this one. No, it's going to be something as basic as, is it level funding? Is it level service? Level funding means we're not going to increase any expenditures, figure it out. Level service means we'll keep service at the current level, make it work. So
well, since the timeline's not up, why don't you walk through your timeline, because it's not on the screen, so folks will know what your timeline is.
Mid-September, we give this budget directive, and one of the things we will pay careful attention to is the mix between capital. Those are buildings. Our buildings are rotting in front of us, so we need to pay attention to those. Buildings and operation. Operation is operating budgets for all the town departments, what you're spending day to day. And we do that a month ahead, so in mid-October, we are setting that in mid-October, the departments will give their initial budgets to the manager. And then we get our first view of the suggested budget at the end of October. So we can work November and December at less than panic pace on getting around the budget, looking at where our revenues are, looking at where the needs are. We put November as a first revenue forecast for the next fiscal year. We typically haven't received those until January, and as you know, they're not very accurate.
Right.
So up until that point, there's a real drive to improve the infrastructure in Town Hall to get us accurate, they won't be usable, but more reliable revenue figures, so that as we work through November and December, we have a better sense. And that way, come the actual budget submission, which is in January, maybe we have a half to 3/4 of the analysis done.
What I appreciate, because having served in state government and in administration and finance, this almost tracks exactly the process that is employed in state government. The departments are making, even now, for the FY, I guess it could be FY20.
Yeah, scary, isn't it?
Yeah, FY20 budget, what they would be, or if, and I forget exactly how they break it up, but whatever the next budget cycle for next July 1, I think it's FY20, they are in the process now. The departments will go through, it then goes to administration and finance about October or November. November to December, it goes from administration and finance to the governor's staff and the budget. And as you know, the governor, I think January 20th, has to issue the budget. You're almost tracking that same process, and it seems to work. I mean, it has its issues. That seems to work because you have enough time to do the analysis that you need to do.
And that's part of the point, because we typically have been still figuring out from the department heads what their requests are and how reasonable they are, waiting for the governor and then the legislature's proposal on what state revenue will be.
Yes.
But we can't plug that in because we're not ready yet.
Right.
So we all want to be ready to plug that number in, and that's on the operating budget side.
Right.
Then we have a capital budget side, and frankly, we haven't paid the kind of attention to capital budgets that we need to. That's why we wind up, let's look at Station 1. That's a perfect example. We haven't paid attention to the capital needs of the town when we could have and should have. And the consequence of that is we wind up with buildings that we either have to replace or have to do major renovations to instead of doing little repairs. Town Hall, okay? Town Hall with a putty knife, right? A scraper and a paintbrush. We could have maintained beautiful hardwood window sills and frames, but we didn't. So we wind up forgetting about the actual glass that probably needed to be, energy efficient. But we had to replace most of the woodwork around those windows because so much of it had rotted out because we didn't maintain it at great expense. Go building by building. We're wasting money, thinking we're saving money, right? Because we say to ourselves, we don't want to spend that 20 grand this year on that. And we don't say to ourselves, all right, and in 3 years we'll have to pay $100,000. Station 1 is a perfect example.
Oh,
all
let's
right?
not even go
Well,
there.
we're going to. But Station 1 is a perfect example, all right? And the way we treat our town employees and the way we treat our public, okay, by how we maintain and pay attention to our buildings. So we have to do it. So part of this process will be early on, this would be the beginning of November, we will get the capital ideas from the department heads. And remember, we set budget priorities in the earlier part in September. And part of that will be from the operating revenue, from the levy. I'm expecting it'll be some number between probably in the 5% range of the levy will be made available for capital projects. No more, no less, figure it out. And that way we mix deferred maintenance, we catch up on that. We look at stuff like what do we have to do regularly, right? And we get that information before Thanksgiving.
And the good part about that, because as you know, when I was here as interim town manager, the issue around Station 1, I just felt that was a travesty. And oftentimes I said, I wish I was the lawyer for those employees, those fire people that were there, because I think that in terms of the deplorable condition of Station 1 needs to be addressed. So I'm hopeful that this process which you're instituting will address Station 1, if no place else. We have the Armory, got Station 1, we have the issue, and we'll probably talk about some of these, the depot, we got Randolph Savings. So I know if you, I think just to recap again, because I think it's helpful for people to understand your budgetary process, just give the timeline again, since it's not up there, as to what you're going to be looking at. I think it's such a great change, and I think it will bear fruit positively.
Big picture dates.
Yes.
Budget directive to town government, September 14th. This is what we see as a policy matter. You should prepare for us in a budget. And my hope is it'll be prepare a budget that's in the range maybe 5% devoted to capital projects, the rest regular operating. I expect it's going to be level service. And I know my position is no new positions to be in the budget that's proposed on January 2nd unless adding those positions have been approved before January 2nd. I don't want to see a budget come in January 2nd with 5 new employees scattered among departments. Okay? It might be we need them, it might be smart, but not on January 2nd. So this says to the department heads and the manager, identify what your needs are. I even think we would probably look at reclassifications and adjustments, because that can add up to a lot of money and catch us by surprise, as it did this year with over $100,000 in reclassifications. Without questioning, and the board doesn't have authority over those, but it's certainly our budget that goes to town meeting. And so all of that's budget directive. And then mid-October, we get the operating budget, the first view of the operating budget. Early November, we get the first view of what the capital requests are, and that's when we begin our review of those, so that when we get the final submission, the official submission from the manager on January 2nd, when it is due, we're already schooled up on what the various requests are, and we can take those several weeks to really prepare a budget for town meeting and the finance committee that's fair to them. Because if we don't, what happens is the people in the finance committee get abused. And they get abused, and town meeting gets abused, because they get to sort all this stuff up, right? Right. Remember a few years ago, the finance committee's function on the budget would be they would essentially audit town government before they would look at the budget request, because the numbers they would get from town government, finance committee felt were unreliable.
Right.
Well, no.
You don't,
No.
Yeah.
So we see that as our role, to give them something that fits what their role is, because we've fulfilled our role.
And it's interesting you say that. Well, I've been on town meeting for at least 6 years, and so I'm, exasperated oftentimes in terms of that process. But I think another change that took place was there was a period of time when the Board of Selectmen abdicated their role to the Finance Committee. And so the Finance Committee was playing the role of, in effect, presenting the real budget. I mean, it was a budget that was submitted, had the title of Board of Selectmen on it, but it was actually came from the town manager with really limited input. And then it was a Finance Committee that was largely viewed as the one who was doing it. I know there was a migration away from that, and now it's good to hear that the Board of Selectmen is going to do what the charter says they're supposed to do.
And the reason that happened, without respect to what people's motives were, the reason in the system that happened was because the Board of Selectmen would submit an unbalanced budget to FinCom. Now, FinCom does not have the ability to increase or reduce items requested, right? They can make a recommendation, but
That's
they can't
correct.
do it. But if an unbalanced budget goes to the Finance Committee, their role is to figure out how to make it balance. And when the Board of Selectmen abdicates the responsibility to set those policies and priorities in the budget that we submit, think about it. Nobody in town elects the Finance Committee townwide. They're individuals, and some are appointed, okay? 9 are appointed by the town moderator, and the rest are elected as town meeting representatives. We're elected townwide. There's a reason
That's right.
it reads the way it does. So that's the view, and we hope that makes town meeting go better and is fairer to the Finance Committee members, because it's not abusive to them. I just, watching FinCom meetings when they would get an unbalanced budget, I would say to myself, why is this fair? It's just not, all right? And so that's the cycle. And then we'll spend the time in January fine-tuning. We'll get the revenue figures in, and hopefully we can get the budget done more quickly.
I'm going to go to my sponsors now, because what I want to do, because then we'll come back and we'll talk about specific projects that you have on tap. We'll talk about how the tax base is done. I want to talk about some internal things that if we have the time, probably in that order. But for the moment, let's bring our sponsors on so we can give them the respect that's due to them.
Hi, it's Gary LaPierre, and the crew wants to thank Maxie's Delicatessen. That's at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. They're 781-341-1662. American Cancer Society, yes, they're looking for volunteers. Drive cancer patients to and from their treatments. 1-800-ACS-6662, or just go to www.cancer.org. Ilsa Mark's Food Pantry in St. Anthony's Free Market, 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher. That's at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. Meals on Wheels. Just ask for Jessica. You'll find her at 781-344-8882. extension 2. Stoughton Penny Saver, our business is advertising your business, they tell us. 27 Rose Glen Street, Stoughton, 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes in Stoughton. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m. It's on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 28. All comments and suggestions welcome. Contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Samaritans, they're at 41 West Street on the 4th floor in Boston, 02111. Their phone number is 617-536-2460. 24-hour helplines for Samaritans, and the number is 877-870-HOPE. That's 877-870-4673. Samaritans, you can find them at 800-252-TEEN. That's 252-8336. Or find them online at SamaritansHope.org.
Today, I have the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Bob O'Regan, here with me. As you can see, you can contact him at 781-344-8209 or at roregan@stoughton-mass.gov. Monday Night Bingo at Ava Torah Congregation, located at 1179 Central Street in Stoughton. Doors open at 4:30 p.m. Game starts at 6:30 p.m. Get there early, stay late, have fun, spend a little bit of money, support a good cause. Get Fresh is Stoughton's own cooking show. New episodes coming soon on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 28, and you can view the program on Mondays at 5:30 p.m., Wednesdays at 8 p.m., Thursdays at 9 a.m., Fridays at 5 o'clock p.m. Get Fresh. Hometown Business Show. It airs on Tuesdays at 11 a.m., Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m., Thursdays at 8 p.m., Sundays at 7 p.m. on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 28. Well, it's not really a new show, but it's a great show. We are united for a healthy Stoughton. It airs on Mondays at 5 p.m., Tuesdays at 9 a.m., Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m., and Fridays at 11 a.m. Again, on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 28. If you're just tuning in, this is Community Forum. I am the host, Joseph Feaster, and my guest today is Bob O'Regan, who is the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and we're discussing a number of issues. We've just heard what the process will be for the selection of the new town manager. We've heard what is going to be the budgetary process that they're going to undertake, and one which, after hearing it, I certainly endorse. We're going to be talking about some of the programs and priorities that the Board of Selectmen have in play. We talked about what the Board of Selectmen is based upon what the charter says, and as far as the implementation under this 5-member board. So we're going to continue the conversation. I want you to stay tuned. And now that we're back, Bob, I want to talk about some of the issues that you have. I know you mentioned in the beginning of the program, we were talking about what's going on in Stoughton Center, and there's a lot of conversation around it. As you know, when I was interim town manager, we talked about the depot. We talked about trying to move the post office and to probably do some development there. We still had and still have Malcolm and Parsons. We have and still have the State Theater. We've even talked about some things as far as tree lining 138. I know there's a lot of priorities, but this is your term, your tenure with your 5-member board. Tell us what's going on in the town so our viewing audience can get a good sense of what the Board of Selectmen is doing in this regard.
The first thing we collectively realized is we have to break the stagnation in getting things done. Some of the stagnation is just because what we're dealing with is so complicated. Now, there's a graphic called Town Meeting Priorities, and if they can pull that up, I can show that how some of these issues fit in. Yeah. So what we've done on the downtown and other parts, other issues we can get at later, is we've looked at the real magnitude of work we've got to do, both each thing and also each item, and also the volume of work. And we've sort of spotted out over 3 possible town meeting sessions, and actually we could schedule this out to spring 2020. We know we've got that work in the pipeline. To give us a sense, and then to share this with boards, committees, and staff, of how to move the bulk of priorities we've got along. So as we've taken the workload in and looked at what we need to do, we've also tried to identify when will we have it ready for town meeting. Because as you know, some things take longer to cook than others. And that's, I must be hungry, that's the way to look at this. So you will see for the fall special town meeting 2 items, and these are the real 2 priorities: Stoughton Center and a public safety building. So you mentioned Stoughton Center. Let's talk about that. We formed a task force. Now, one of the stagnation problems has been that there's overlapping authority, there's overlapping responsibility, and it's complicated. So what's the goal? At least for me, the goal is government does what it has to do to trigger the private sector to come in, because government can't fix the center. Government might have helped it get into the mess it is, and that's what we have to understand we have a responsibility to fix. So this task force, 7 members, led by Selectman Howe, member of the Redevelopment Authority, member of the Planning Board, a developer, a real estate person, a real estate broker experienced in town squares and commercial real estate, the Economic Development Officer. So this group is working to come back to us at our July 24th meeting with a list of deliverables. And the request has been, come back and tell us what we can go to town meeting with on the fall. And come back and tell us what we need to deal with. Malcolm and Parsons, the big eyesore in the square. We have to deal with that. What's the problem with it? Well, the problem with that is, frankly, this sort of tension among what can government do, what is it that the private sector needs to do. So we have a bylaw that sets parking. We have a bylaw that says what the development is. There were 2 town meeting articles to address the Stoughton Center. There was disagreement between the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board on what should happen. Both articles failed. So now we have Malcolm and Parsons approved February 25th, 2016 by the Planning Board. So that's 2.5 years ago. And they were given 60 days to find and secure the additional parking spaces they needed to build that project. My view is that project should be built by now. And it should be built by now either because the developer has found those spaces, or the planning board on the 60, I'm not saying the 61st day you pull the plug, but after some period of time, maybe 90 days, call in and you reverse the vote. Because you and I know that the market will solve that problem. But as long as that permit is hanging out there, that's going to be stuck. And we've seen some of that play out with, well, the town should do this, the town should do that. We can't be, we just don't have the capacity or the authority to temporarily deliver to one developer town parking spaces. Right? We can't do it. And then if we do it for one, and there's another developer, and even if that were a policy, we don't have one. And we don't have any way to make one because we don't have the available parking to make that. And we have no clue of how many units are going to go in. So in talking with some of the people in the police department and hearing from the residents, there's a lot of pressure for parking in the downtown. So if we allow off-street parking as a way to let the development go, the residents are concerned they don't have enough places to park and in front of their houses up and down the streets. And the merchants are concerned. So I think to move on, the planning board needs to make a decision on whether their permit should continue or not, and then allow the market to come back if they decide it should be revoked. The developer probably would, I would imagine they would say, we're going to review this, and he probably would come back. But that's what we need to do is.
But that surprises me, though. I served on the Board of Appeals in Boston, and normally we had a situation of 2 years. If you didn't either one act on the permits that were given, or if you didn't come in to seek an extension, they automatically terminated. That's not the case here in Stoughton?
It's not the case here. It's not the case here because they voted it. What you're talking about. Now this is when we get dweeby. So they voted the permit on February 25th. They never issued the permit. So the 2-year clock technically,
it never ran.
I think, never started to tick. So that has put this sort of in purgatory. And some of the public pressure that I get is, why aren't you selectmen solving that problem? And the answer is, you know, we don't have the capacity to solve it, and it's not our problem to solve. One thing we did support was increasing the radius for the parking so that off-site parking, and the planning board, some members of the planning board actually opposed that. So, but that's an example, to get back to the task force, of people sitting down and knitting together these solutions. The State Theater. The State Theater is critical to bringing the downtown back. We need to commit to making that work. If you look at the master plan and the economic development plan for the downtown, 2 separate documents, and they're on the website, that'll create a draw. And if you look at some other community theaters that have come back, Medford Square, the Chevalier Theater, tremendous success. Beverly, Arlington, Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Stoughton, Wisconsin had a theater almost the same size as ours. They were ready to put it on the wrecking ball. Stoughton, Wisconsin bought the theater, brought it back, and it's now the shining star of their downtown, and it's promoted expansion. The Palace Theater in Manchester, New Hampshire was a wreck. A charitable group bought that back. And that whole end of Elm Street is now thriving. And a reason for that is the magnet of the theater. So that's what this task force will give us starting the 24th of July.
Well, let me ask you about,
where do you got to go? And
yeah.
then we farm it out. And then the other thing I see this board doing is to ask, you know, it's a lot to ask volunteers to do this amount of work, but to ask the volunteers, can you come back for the fall special town meeting? If we need zoning or bylaw, can you do that? And then the next step is, and can you get the rest of it for a spring 2019 annual town meeting? Our commitment is we're not going to wait around to have it done.
Well, let me just raise another point, because see, this is what I can do when I'm sitting here. You know, I'm not running for anything but cover, so therefore I'm not concerned. You know, there are many that say, in terms of, you know, there are 50 people that run the town. So for the planning board, I would suspect that majority of those people have served on there. The only way they're going to come off is if they carry them out, you know, feet first. As far as I recall from the charter, the Board of Selectmen make the appointments to the planning board. As I say, if there's obstruction, if you will, using my terminology, this is not yours, that's taking place, then it's a matter of handling the appointment process to make sure that you can get folks who can move the agenda forward. And so I just throw that out as a consideration.
And we did that this year.
Okay. Okay.
And I anticipate that is a philosophy this board will have. No disrespect to the people who have been serving, but it's time for some changes on that board.
Okay. Just so you know, I want to say, you can, folks, you can say Feaster raised it, and that's fine, but I think that that's one of the ways, being involved in organizational aspects, being involved in government, if you have a cog in the wheel, you got to remove the cog in order to get things done. And so sometimes you need to make sure you have certain people in place who will move the agenda. So enough said. I know that you...
But it also goes to accountability. It
Yes.
also goes to accountability. So as a community, we haven't told the planning board what it is we would like from them and when we would like it. We haven't. That's a function, I think, in part of the Board of Selectmen. And so what you'll be seeing from this board is an ask to the planning board. It'll be an ask and to the town planner. Similar to what I just said about Stoughton Center. We identified 4 what we think are the primary areas for economic development. Why are those important? Because the current budget cannot be sustained on the tax base we have. It can't be, okay? The costs of operating the town are growing faster than the revenue. So we have to do something to improve the tax base. I'm
going to help us, because I know that, you know, you and I, we could probably do a 4-hour program because there's so much to talk about. But I'm just going to list some of the things, because I do want to move to the tax base, because as a taxpayer, I am very interested. I would love to have commercial entities that might reduce my tax base as a residential owner. Right. But let's talk about some of the other projects. Might be the post office site. We've talked about that. I just want to listen, because if we go into them in detail, we're going to be here for a while. The Randolph Savings Bank, which I know.
Post office site.
Yes.
We may have that ready for approval for acquisition at the fall special town meeting. My hope is that the Community Preservation Committee, which has resources available for open space, will help greatly in the assistance to pay for that. And the Redevelopment Authority has accepted design responsibility for the post office site to be converted into a green. That is actively being looked at by this task force. If folks are interested, July 24th, we'll get an update on that. My target is if it can't be ready for vote to acquire by the first week of November at a town meeting, it will definitely, or should definitely be available for the spring town meeting in 2019.
Randolph Savings Bank.
Randolph Savings Bank. Randolph Savings Bank, frankly, has a lot of potential uses, including counter and retail service for the post office. A bunch of other opportunities, including parking. When we acquired that, we actually acquired 3 separate sites. So what we're doing now is evaluating what the highest and best use of that is. If it's a relocation of the retail services of the post office with the parking, that might be a good use. There's other suggestions for development. We're going to decide what to do and how to do it within 2.5 or 3 years. It's not going to be another thing we're sitting on.
And you're working with
and
Stoughton
we're working
Redevelopment
with the
Authority.
Redevelopment Authority and the Friends of Stoughton Center on that. So if you looked at our longer-term town meeting calendar, you would see that a decision on whether to dispose or redevelop the Randolph Savings Bank site would be on probably the spring 2020 town meeting, unless before then we have got an agreement to move the post office or some other facility there.
What about the train depot?
The MBTA inserted some things into the proposed deed that were problematic, and we, thankfully, I think we've got the last of those resolved, so we're in the final stage of it. Secretary Ash is very supportive of what we want to do with the depot, and in fact, we are applying for a $75,000 grant from his office, which we're optimistic to get in mid-October to help clean up. As you know, because of the state's neglect of the building, there's substantial animal hazardous material in the building, and this grant, if we get it, of $75,000 will help to remediate and start bringing it back. So I'm hopeful that in the fall town meeting, we will already own it. We will already have our complete renovation done. The board will have issued an RFP for reuse. We will, if in the ideal world we don't live in, we get a conveyance by early August. It's possible, but not really. My plan is to hold a public hearing for the community to tell us what they would like us to do with it. We weigh it. If there's a segment of the community that wants to use that as a community site and historic, there's another segment of the community that wants to use it as an anchor for redevelopment of the downtown and the business. We make that call, and we either go to the town meeting in the fall and say, here's the public use, or I don't think we need to go to the town. The selectmen take the lead and get it redeveloped. There is interest in that site from a number of ways, so that by Christmas time, the first of the year, we know what's happening with the depot, and maybe the work will be well underway.
I'm going to raise the South Coast Rail because, I mean, these are all ambitious. I just will simply say the timeline and the agenda and the amount. I mean, I trust that the 5 of you have no other jobs that you are engaged in and no other family that you're with. We're just going to put you in
and no
one
other
room.
interest and
That's right.
to do.
Then that
Right.
because this is definitely a very aggressive and ambitious agenda. And of course, as a Stoughton resident, I hope that you're successful in bringing it about. And then when you do,
this comes back to the town manager, okay?
Yes.
Because most of the things that need to be done are things that can't be done by volunteers. They can't be done.
right.
And they are things that we should expect the manager and his staff will do. But they have to be told. It has to be put on the manager's hit list of priorities. If you don't give a town manager, for example, a performance evaluation for 3 years and you don't tell them what's expected in the next year, you're going to be dissatisfied with what happens. So one commitment of this board is these ambitious goals and things that we're working on will be delegated in large part to staff. And I can tell you from my interaction with staff, they're enthused about working on this. What I'm hearing from various department heads is they like the idea that we are giving direction on what we want accomplished and letting them do what it is they know how to do.
Right. South Coast Rail, just as I know the project on there, and then I would want to move right to the tax base because our time is evaporating. And so
Okay.
let's talk about South Coast Rail. That's been bantered around for over 15, 20 years. So where is that? I know the state, the state hasn't done much movement on it. Where are we as far as Stoughton, and has our position remained the same?
Our position is the same. We will oppose it unless it is depressed, and over the downtown area, the phrase is depressed and covered. That is, a tunnel, I don't think is feasible, but they can excavate. We've already got some engineering views that they can begin an excavation. The right-of-way actually rises coming into Stoughton, so they could excavate where the rise begins, so that by the time you get to the crossing at Central Street, for example, it could be depressed, if not between Central and School Street. It would be below grade, and then as it comes over into the square, we put a platform over it. And so as it comes through the square and then gets down past Brock Street, it's below grade. And then it comes up and moves on its merry way. And that will allow us to continue doing what we're doing. The other part of the train that we want to do is we want to create a quiet zone in the downtown. Quiet zone means that the bells and the whistles, the safety whistles that you hear, which are required, and having worked for the old railroad company, Conrail, I can tell you those horns are very important.
Yes.
But there are techniques to have safe crossings without the horns. It's kind of expensive, but if you match up the development we can get in the downtown without those horns getting in the way, we should look at it.
Let's move on a bit, because I know our time is moving rapidly on here, and some things I just want to have us mention, because it's just under the heading of, and I think I want to move to this one. I want to move to the public safety, because we talked about public safety building. You already mentioned about the Freeman Street Fire Station. Let's talk about your thoughts and what you have in mind for the public safety. And I'm only going to give you 2 minutes to talk about it, though.
Both the Freeman Street Fire Station and our police headquarters are inadequate. They were both, the Freeman Street Station has been inadequate for, say, 50 years. The Rose Street Police Station was inadequate when it was built. Now, aside from the fact that they're buildings, what I'm looking at is the operational difficulties the insufficient facilities create for the town in public safety, and how that impairs police and fire to provide the services that we need, right? So if you've got, for example, in the police station, we had an evidence room in a basement in a sealed building built above an operating underground stream. We had humidity issues. That really isn't good for preserving evidence, is it? All right. So I could go on, but both buildings, but Freeman Street is critically bad. When I talked about
Well, let's talk about the future plans, because we don't have much time.
The future plan is both buildings need to be replaced, okay? It's inevitable, they will be. It isn't going to get easier, it's not going to get cheaper. So public safety building hopefully will be on the agenda for the fall town meeting. The site selection process is well on its way. There's an architect, on-call architect. We haven't designed it, but we've got a sense of what the space requirements is and to cost it out. And what I'm asking people to understand is when we look at our public buildings and we see they're inadequate, it's because when we put them up, we knew they wouldn't work. And the result is we have buildings we spend a ton more money on later, and they still don't work. We're going to ask the voters to think about that and think about the working conditions for the people who literally risk their lives for us in both police and fire.
I know we didn't talk about it, and we're not going to do it here, but I want to mention it, the Armory, and at some point in time, we'll have an opportunity to have you speak about that. But
we'll have a hearing on that probably in September.
Code enforcement, very quickly, in terms of, I see boats and all types of things in yards, and, I thought we had put some code enforcement things in place. Quickly, what do you have in mind for code enforcement?
First thing is we need to get some metrics on measuring productivity in code enforcement, what's reasonable to expect from those folks. Second, because some of the code enforcement requires court appearances, you can't have an inspector out inspecting and spending half a day in court. So we need to look and see how we're going to use those resources. And third, in September, I hope we're going to take up a code enforcement task force bylaw. I've already been in touch with the district attorney's office for support in putting that together so that we can do that and then vigorously prosecute, condemn, remove serious code violations. I mean, the stuff where somebody's got a trailer that's an inch and a half too big, I'm not concerned about. But when you've got some of the safety issues, when you've got children living in basements, when you've got single-family homes turned into rooming houses, no, and that's got to stop.
Lastly, tax base. We're all concerned about the taxes. I know you had talked about the Stoughton Center. There are other areas, North Washington Street, North Stoughton, Park Street, the Campanelli properties. Where are those in the thinking of the Board of Selectmen?
The thinking on the Board of Selectmen is that North Washington Street and North Stoughton are probably the two higher than Park Street, because Park Street requires us to get the sewer going, right? So what I think we're going to wind up doing is put together the same sort of task force structure, because so far that seems to be doing well for Stoughton Center, and develop what needs to be done in terms of zoning, design guidelines, recruitment for those districts. I'll give you an example for North Stoughton, largely zoned industrial, right? So they're not really building too many new factories. So a permitted use in North Stoughton is warehouse. Warehouse doesn't really give us a whole lot of bang in tax base. So we figure out what it is and how it is, and we partner, and we get it going with the property owners. Campanelli Park, our town assessor tells us that if we put sewer in Campanelli Park and the area down Park Street, those property values would triple. Right? So part of what we need to do, and part of the budget process we talked about earlier on, is to look at what our revenue needs are for the kind of town we want. Because in business, this is what we do. And then we say, this is the money we need to, how are we going to get it? We haven't done that. This board is working on that. And so we have developed these 4 areas as prime
Well, as we come to
it.
the close of the program, I want to first say thank you for being here and having such an array of initiatives that this Board of Selectmen are doing. What I say to the viewing audience, however, is there are opportunities to serve on the task force. This is our town. And these are our elected officials that we have here. So I encourage you to stay informed, get involved, serve on the task force, come to be heard at the various hearings, and support what this Board of Selectmen is doing. Because if you aren't part of the solution, then you must be part of the problem. So again, thank you for watching us here on Community Forum. Tune in as often as you can to see the programs that we have. And to my guests, I want to say, Mr. Chairman, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.